chatting with you. What I'm here to talk about, well, my name is Nib Zalavadia, and I'm with a startup called My Web Career. What I'm here to talk about today is My Web Career and how we at My Web Career are using Windows Azure to meet our needs. We have a pretty sophisticated and complex service that we offer for our end users. And what Windows Azure has done for us is afforded us the luxury of having this platform on the Windows Azure platform at a price point that we can stomach, right? Windows Azure obviously is highly available and can scale on demand. And again, it's at a price point for a startup such as ourselves that we can live with. My presentation is broken into 4 segments. In the first segment, I'm going to give you a bit of background as to what we do, where we saw the opportunity in the marketplace for our service, but more importantly, what is the problem that we're trying to solve for our end users, both from a consumer standpoint as well as from an enterprise perspective. By doing so, I'm hoping to give you some context as to the complexity or the complexity and sophistication of the platform that we have that's hosted on Azure. In the second segment, I'm going to actually do a live demonstration of the service so that you see what our users utilize on a daily basis. In the third segment, I'm going to cover My Web Career's architecture on Azure and why we made some of the decisions that we made in terms of architecture. In the last segment, I'm going to share some stats with you in terms of how we scaled when we were featured on Mashable.com on their front page on March 3rd. I'm going to share some statistics in terms of how many users we registered, how we handled the additional traffic, as well as how we increased the instances and what it cost us. And then lastly, we'll have some time for Q&A. With that said, let's get right into it. FICO for your online brand. We've toyed around with many taglines over the past few months. Some good, some bad, some that we created, some that our users suggested for us. My personal favorite is if LinkedIn and cloud were to have a baby, it would be My Web Career. However, if I were to describe our service in 5 words or less, it would be this: FICO for your online brand. And the service is freely available on www.mywebcareer.com. So, as I mentioned, the first segment, I'm going to give you a perspective in terms of what is the market that we're addressing, what market does our service address. And before I get into that, I want to give you a bit of background as to myself and the founding team at My Web Career. There are 3 of us, and all 3 of us worked at companies called ChoicePoint and i2 over the years. And what we did at these companies is we dealt with very, very large data sets in terms of public records and provided data discovery and analytical solutions for law enforcement agencies. And what law enforcement agencies used the service for was very much to track or locate individuals of interest. And without getting into the finer details, it was individuals that didn't necessarily want to be found, right? So one of the things that we noticed, or that law enforcement agencies came to us about 3-4 years ago and said was they were very much interested in not only the data sets that we had, but also online information that they could locate about individuals on top of the data sets that we had. So we conceived and built a product called CLEAR, which stands for Consolidated Lead Evaluation and Reporting, that was immensely successful and still is. It's actually one of the top tool that law enforcement agencies have at their discretion today to track individuals of interest. While there, the founding team started thinking about other arenas or other marketplaces where we could utilize our expertise that we had built over the years, as well as some of the methodologies and how we can address a different need. And because we had expertise in dealing with large unstructured data sets, we thought individuals' online presence or individuals' online brand was a good market to go into. But we didn't want to just focus on online brand, right? Just online presence. We wanted to be very much focused on their online brand as it pertains to a user's career. And there were a couple of reasons for it. One mainly was because nobody else was doing that at that time. And so we thought that would be a major differentiator of our service. And so we strategically focused on online brand as it pertains to one's career, hence the recruitment market. At the same time, what we were noticing in the recruitment market was increasingly companies were utilizing social media to support their recruitment efforts, both in terms of sourcing candidates as well as vetting candidates. Here are some of the stats, right? 73% of companies were using social media to support recruitment efforts. Approximately 77% of hiring managers were, looking up individuals, searching them on Google before they made a hiring decision. And the trend was growing, right? More and more companies that we talked to said that they were planning to use social media more to source candidates as well as to fulfill open positions. And then with that, the traditional job board sites, they were planning to use less and less of. I mean, job board sites are great in terms of sourcing candidates, but in terms of, how do you get to the right candidate? How do you identify a candidate that's going to best fit your, meet the JD that you have or job description that you have? And one of the key factors that also occurred around this time was online communities. So communities such as Stack Overflow or Stack Exchange, Trilogy, as well as Quora or Twitter, were increasingly providing insight into an individual's online reputation. So, if I claim to be an expert on C# or on infrastructure, am I maintaining that presence? Am I active on those sites to, validate my claim? However, from a consumer standpoint, it's the problem that we're addressing with My Web Career is it's an extremely competitive job market, right? For every open position, it's estimated that there are 68 applicants per job posting. So how do you distinguish yourself so that you can best get a call for an interview or get an in-person interview? Again, employers were using social media to not only source but vet open screen candidates. And then one of the things that happens with an online brand is it sets your first impression for an employer, right? Whether you have an online brand or the lack of an online brand is also a first impression that an employer or professional colleague will have of you. And it was increasingly being used by companies as well as business interactions. The problem from a consumer standpoint was, it's one thing to have an online brand, but how do you uncover that brand? How do you evaluate it? How do you know where you stack up? And then how do you maintain that over time, right? So I can go online today and do a search on Nip Zalavadia and see what sort of information it pulls back. Well, that's a point in time, right? And also, what I pull back is pages and pages worth of data. How do I make sense of that data? Is doing a search on Google enough? Do I also need to search on, say, Yahoo or Bing to see if there are different search results that get pulled back? How do I also look at some of the other sites, some social media sites, so in terms of Twitter, Quora, to see how I'm being perceived there? And also, in terms of, I've got an active account on LinkedIn, I've got an active account on Facebook. How do I monitor stuff that's being said about me on those sites if I don't visit them on a daily basis? So having an online brand can be a material liability if you don't maintain it or if you don't cultivate it, or it could be a decided competitive advantage, right? So if you maintain a healthy online brand, you could use it to your advantage to get the job that you covet or to win a prospective client. From an employer standpoint, or from a flip side, having a competitive job market is good, right? Because you get all these candidates that you can source. But how do you get to the right one? How do you find the needle in the haystack, right? How do you know that the individual, if you got a pile of 100 resumes, how do you know which one you want to call? Obviously, it's impractical to go through 100 resumes and then have a phone interview with each and every one of them. Manual candidate screening is costly and time-consuming, right? Again, for the same reasons I just identified. It's not enough just to have a cursory look at LinkedIn profiles or Facebook profiles. And quite frankly, there are potential liability issues. As a hiring manager, is it okay for me to look at is it okay for me to view some of the information that's available to this individual and in a hiring practice, right? Obviously, race, ethnicity, sex, et cetera. It's fraught with liability issues. So how can employers evaluate how can employers look at online data by removing these liability concerns? And then having a comprehensive online brand is a major differentiator, not only from a candidate's perspective, but also from an employer standpoint. So how do we address these problems? We generate what's called a career score. A career score is similar to a credit score, but whereas a credit score is based on financial behavior, a career score is based on real-time analysis of your online presence, behavior, and accomplishments, and how these accomplishments and behavior is going to be perceived by potential employers or business colleagues. Users of our service, we generate career score for them, and we also provide them a single metric to see how they stack up against the rest of my web career users. And then we track it over time. So, as a user of our service, once you sign up for the service, we generate a career score, and then on a monthly basis, we'll regenerate your career score by evaluating and uncovering your digital footprint. So how do we do it? The way we do it is we use profile data from both LinkedIn and Facebook to seed searches, both open searches as well as API-based searches against search engines. We use social media to essentially glean information on an individual in terms of their career claims as well as their specialties. We do this by evaluating network profiles. We do this by looking at career claims. So if you've held a job as a CTO of the Motley Fool, in my case, are we able to find references to that position by conducting searches online? Or are there blog posts? Are there other references that we can find to validate that career claim? We also perform network evaluation. So are you connected, if you've held a position at My Web Career or Microsoft, are you connected to individuals at those organizations? And if so, how well connected are you? Are you also friends with those individuals on Facebook? Do you also maintain profiles on accounts such as Twitter, Cloud, Crunchbase, Stack Exchange, Trilogy, Quora, and so forth? So how do we do it? Again, our platform automates the data discovery and analysis process, and we evaluate over 250 attributes of your online presence to deliver compelling and actionable insight into your online brand. The way we do it, and here's a sort of a logical diagram of the previous slide. We ingest data from LinkedIn and Facebook. We perform real-time data discovery using the source data that we found on those profiles. We then go out to these various APIs and see if we can match some of the claims that you've made on those profile data. So again, we go out to Quora, Crunchbase, Stack Overflow, Twitter, and so forth. And these data sources are something that we're continually going to be increasing or adding on a monthly basis. The data that we pull back is fed into an entity extraction engine. And when we do that, what we're doing there is we're identifying entities such as themes, people, places, which then gets used subsequently, I'll just go into. And one of the things that we also do during this process is we perform network analysis. One second. We perform network analysis to provide users with an interactive view of their both personal as well as professional networks and affiliations. At the end of this process, we produce three sets of documents. These are XML documents career footprint, personal footprint, and social footprint. And within these documents, what these documents contain is metadata for entities and relationships identified within search results. These documents facilitate our rule-driven analytics and scoring process. And that's how we generate both the career score as well as the underlying metrics. And at the end of it, so this is what constitutes our build process. So when a user signs up for the service, we do this again in real time in approximately less than 30 seconds or so, and deliver to the end user a link chart that they can visually explore, their online footprint. Give them, provide them obviously their career score, but also give them meaning as to what their career score stands for, and what additional things they can do with their career score. Again, we also provide metrics, and then we monitor over time. At a very high level, career footprint contains users' online data as respective to their career and positions. Personal footprint contains data that may relate to them personally. We also conduct deep web searches. So one of the things that a user of our service gets is, we look for across 50 different social platforms or online accounts, so such as Amazon Wishlist, Babies R Us, Toys R Us, and we educate the individual and let them know that, hey, look, there's an account that exists out there about you that you may have forgotten about, and that's very true. I mean, I'm a good example of that. I had an account on Babies R Us that I created for a baby registry that I created for my son 4 years ago, or that my wife had created using my email address that I had completely forgotten about. That was out there in the open. And then finally, the social footprint document contains data across all social networks in terms of all your network connections as well as your privacy settings and so forth. In a nutshell, a build process, and the reason I'm defining these now is when we go into the Azure architecture, it's important to understand our architecture on Azure. It's important to define this now. So a build process is where we ingest the user's data, execute searches against search engines, consume data that we retrieve from third-party APIs, correlate all the data the resulting data, feed it into entity extraction engine, and produce these 3 footprint documents. And then finally, we generate the career score and the underlying metrics. Our progress. The company was founded in January of 2010. We had our first release on Azure, so essentially prior to alpha, just a dummy deployment that we did on Azure was back in May of 2010. We did a closed alpha release in June of last year, and then a closed beta release in October of 2010. And then just about 2 months ago, we did our open beta release, and the service is out live. In beta mode, so there's still some kinks that we're working out, but it's available to everybody out there. One of the things I'd also like to highlight is that we joined Microsoft's BizSpark program back in March of last year, and so there are approximately 35,000 companies in the BizSpark program, and we're privileged, we're thrilled that we were selected as one of the BizSpark 1 programs, which goes through an extended due diligence within Microsoft. And we were selected as a BizSpark 1 just a couple of months ago. And then lastly, as I mentioned, on March 3rd is when we were featured on Mashable.com, which I'll share some of the stats from there with you. With that said, I'm gonna jump into the second segment of the presentation, which is I'm gonna give you a quick demo of our service. And this is live at www.mywebcareer.com. To use our service, we require a user to have either a Facebook account or a LinkedIn account. As I mentioned earlier, we use profile data contained within your Facebook or LinkedIn account to seed searches, and so therefore it's a must that one has to have an account at one of these providers. And I think you'll be I'll certainly be surprised to learn if one of you don't have an account on Facebook or LinkedIn. I'm going to go ahead and sign up via LinkedIn. And the first thing, as part of our registration, we use OAuth to retrieve profile data from LinkedIn. So it's going to ask me to authorize my web career access to my LinkedIn profile. I'm going to go ahead and sign in here. And as soon as I sign up, we immediately start retrieving profile data from this user, so for myself in the moment, and we start conducting, we initiate what's called the build process, as we discussed a couple of minutes back. And what we're doing here again is seeding searches against internet search engines. We're evaluating profiles across various networks, and then we're evaluating the resulting content. As you can see, that process finished in probably in less than 20 seconds or so. So it's pretty fast, and again, it's in real time that we're doing this. On the resulting screen, and we inform the user what their career score is, provide them one metric. So my career score is 720, and that tells, we message to the end user, letting them know how that stacks up, right? So a career score of 720 is considered pretty healthy. And against my web career population, this graph here shows whether I'm in the green or if I need to work on my online brand. The chart here, which is a historical reference point, obviously I just signed up for the service, so I don't have a prior data. If I had signed up for the service 6 months ago, it would show my career score over time. Furthermore, we break individuals' career score down into 3 segments, so they get the user gets a feel for what aspect of their online brand do they need to work on. So for me, it tells me that I'm well connected from a network perspective. I have connections to positions that I've listed on LinkedIn and on Facebook. It tells me I'm doing an average on my profile, so I have a profile on LinkedIn. But I haven't added any of my other profiles, so I've got some work to do there. And then in terms of my search results, again, it's telling me that I have an average search results. So we're not only conducting search, but we're also evaluating in terms of what page of the search results is your name found on. And we'll get into some of the details around that. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to also connect Facebook because I want to show you some of the analytics that we provide across both networks. And again, we use OAuth to retrieve content from my Facebook account. And then as soon as we give my web career access to my Facebook account, a build is kicked off. And anytime a user adds a new data source, a build gets kicked off. So it's pretty important for us to have a very, very clean and fast underlying infrastructure so that the build times are very, 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 very low. For those of you that may have signed on to the service, please do note that we use Flash. So of course, if you're pulling up the site on an iPad or iPhone, it's not going to work, and we're aware of that. Unfortunately, the underlying analysis that we perform and the charting that we use requires Flash, and we're actively working with a vendor to move to HTML5. So in terms of, so this is the landing page. As you can see, when I added my Facebook account, it bumped up my score slightly, right? I think it went from 720 to 769. And then, it also should have improved my profile because it has one additional data source that it's evaluating now. In addition to the basic sort of awareness of an online brand, we identify things that the user can work on, right? So what are some of the glaring weakness or glaring areas that I may take action on to improve my online presence? And here, from a network standpoint, it tells me that I'm not connected to individuals or any colleagues at Summit Consulting. Same thing on LinkedIn. It also tells me I'm not connected to, so we evaluate LinkedIn profiles, right? And it tells me that I don't have a LinkedIn recommendation. And obviously, if I'm in the job market, that's probably one of the first ways or fastest way I can go about validating my career claims or validating my competency at a particular position by getting my colleagues or my supervisors to write a recommendation for me. One of the things that we do for Facebook is we do keyword sentiment analysis. Right, so things such as, I hate my job, I hate my boss, profanity, as well as other keywords. I mean, we perform negative sentiment analysis and inform the user if we find something. We don't, our service is not intended to remove, or nor do we claim to remove any negative or derogatory data. Our service is intended to reflect, to identify the positives about an individual's online brand. And one thing that I didn't point out earlier, or two things actually, is, and these are pretty important points. One is that our service is very much opt-in. We don't go out and generate career scores for individuals without their consent. A user has to sign up for the service to get their career score. Also, I compared career score to a credit score earlier. But one key difference between a career score and a credit score is the fact that a credit score is widely available to various institutions and whatnot. But a career score is only available to you. You can choose to make that career score public, and we have that functionality within the service to share your career score, but by default, that career score is private. And again, in terms of some of the areas that we identified for me in terms of where I could improve my online presences, we were not able to find any online references to some of the positions that I've held past. So my chief technology, CTO position at the Motley Fool, or director of IT at the Motley Fool prior to that. And one of the reason for that in my case is I legally changed my name a few years back, and so when I worked at these organizations, it was with a different name. Today, in our service, we don't accommodate change of last names, but that's something that we're working on. We do allow a nickname, so Nip for Neeple or Neeple for Nip, but we don't allow change of last names. So that's something that we're working on enhancing. And off of this page, once a user takes some action, so if I were to go and request somebody to write me a recommendations, etc., I don't need to wait 30 days to rerun my footprint. I can go and just simply click on refresh my score, and it'll update in real time. And by default, we allow the users to do that 3 times in a month. On the My Data tab, here's where we provide analytics to the end user. So in my case, I signed up with a LinkedIn account. I connected to my Facebook. We were also able to find profile of me on Crunchbase. I haven't connected my Twitter account, and I haven't entered my email address. As soon as I enter, we grabbed my email address from Facebook. But in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the negative sentiment analysis that we perform, it's on this page. We highlight the offending keywords, which may be offending. I mean, the negative sentiment analysis engine is very much in the beta stage, where we mistakenly may identify wrong items. But in my case, I put this up there earlier today to highlight this component of the service. You also notice here that the lock here is gray versus this one is green, and that what we're doing there is we're informing the user in terms of what their privacy settings are. Gray highlights that it's a custom setting. Green is good. It's open to all my friends, and then there should be some red here somewhere. Yeah, red means that it's open to everyone. Let's look at some of the analytics or some of the analysis that we performed across my both personal and social or professional network. So it shows that I have, across both Facebook and LinkedIn, I have 694 connections. This orange chart here, this orange slice here represents individuals that I have connected on both networks. So 16% of my connections are, there are LinkedIn connections of mine, but they're also, and as well as Facebook friends. And that's a pretty decent amount of connections. And we think, it's quite logical, right? If you work with individuals for many years, you're likely to become friends with those individuals and therefore friends them on Facebook. And we think that reflects positive on an individual. And therefore the higher the sort of the intersection between personal and professional connections, we give the end user a few points in their career score. And then this chart here shows the number of companies that I'm connected to through my first degree connections, or number of companies that I'm affiliated with through my first degree connections. And you can tell that obviously LinkedIn has the majority because a lot of folks are now starting to enter company data on Facebook, but they're not quite there yet. We also perform some analysis on the top 10 companies that I'm connected to. So in my case, it's the Motley Fool, ChoicePoint, IMAP, companies that that I've worked with, obviously. And you could tell we've got some cleaning up to do where our entity extraction engine doesn't necessarily identify I2 Inc. and I2 comma Inc. as one entity. Same thing for industries. We provide a chart to show you the top 10 industries that you're connected to or you're affiliated with. And in my case, it makes sense for it to be IT, because my background is in IT. And we do the same thing for Facebook. In terms of your search results, again, we're evaluating the resulting data that we pull back and performing keyword analysis or entity. We feed those search results back into an entity extraction engine and then providing this analysis to you, right? So when we perform the analysis on my search results, it tells me that the top individuals that I was connected with was obviously, or that were also mentioned in those online search results was Greg Coyle, who happens to be my colleague and co-founder of My Web Career, which makes sense since both of us get quoted in the press quite often. And then also these other individuals that I've done, that I've had professional relationships with. In this chart, we also provide the end user the actual data that we pulled back, that we retrieved for the end user, right? So here are the search results, and we highlight these, these entities that we've identified for them. This My Network tab is something that I discussed earlier, which is we perform network analysis across both your personal and your professional network to produce this chart. And we think this is very unique in the marketplace today. No one really does this, where it provides a merged view of your personal and professional network. And it's an interactive chart, so I can click on this and see who else am I connected to. I'm going to go ahead and pop this out. Who else am I connected to at Motley Fool? And you could tell I'm connected to a lot of individuals at Motley Fool. But if you look closer, you'll see that there's a LinkedIn icon and a Facebook icon here, which tells me that I'm connected to this individual both on Facebook as well as on LinkedIn. And again, this chart is interactive, so I can click on any one of these individuals, then it shows me from that individual, who else am I connected to? So this individual is connected to the Motley Fool, EDS corporations, and so forth. Again, this is an interactive chart, and we've gotten very good feedback on this chart. The red line indicates that it's a current position, so this individual is currently employed at Fannie Mae. The thicker the line, just reflects that that individual has been associated with that company for a longer period of time. And lastly, what I want to show in this live demo is we have as I mentioned earlier, a user can choose to make their profile, by default, the career score as well as their My Web Career profile is private. However, if the user is content with what their online brand is and what their overall career score is, they can come here and make their profile public. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Select a vanity URL, and there I go. I've done that. And so here's what someone someone outside of My Web Career or someone that looks up Nip Zalavadia on Google, etc. They'll find my public profile, my Web Career public profile, and that they'll be able to see my career score with an indication of what that career score means, along with the data that we use to produce that career score. And this part of the service has been very popular. I think approximately 20% or so of our users over the past month have made their profile public. And it varies. It's not just individuals that have a high career score. It's all the individuals. I mean, we have individuals such as Scott Hanselman here, who happens to be a principal program manager lead at Microsoft, who's got a very good, very, very healthy career score. He's in the top 1%. So with that said, I'm going to flip back over to the presentation. So My Web Career in Azure, right? Why do we choose Azure? What were some of our top level business requirements? How are we architected on Azure? Not only in terms of the roles, but in terms of storage, as well as how does the UI poll some of the worker roles that we have in the back end? And then in terms of what are some of the things that we're going to be focused on next in terms of My Web Career on Azure? And then again, I'm going to share some stats from our Mashable.com coverage, and then have some time for Q&A. So top level business requirements. For us, it was very, very important to do the entire data discovery, evaluation, and generating of that career score in real time. That was key for us. That's a major, major differentiator of our service compared to some of the other services that are out there. So we wanted to make sure that everything occurred in real time. That was a no-brainer for us. Also, it's important for us to engage our users as a web service. We wanted to continue to bring people back onto our site, and so how do we do that? We obviously do that with our monthly monitoring service, right, where we send out an email to the users and let them know if their score has gone up or down. But we also add new data sources on a monthly basis. Just last week, I think, we added Quora as a data source, which was a big feat in itself. And with the market that we're in, which is the online reputation market, right? It's a very, very hot topic. So we wanted to be able to handle unprecedented spikes in traffic on the fly. We wanted we can't have a service in this day and age where you've got a website up and running, and on one day you're able to handle all the users no problem. But suppose you're on CNN.com's front page. How do you handle that growth in traffic overnight? In the typical in a typical world where you have servers, et cetera, in a data center, well, that would be impractical, right? Because you would obviously have to purchase a lot of servers, and it's nearly impossible to get them all stationed overnight. Then also, again, as I mentioned, we run full refreshes for the users on a monthly basis when we regenerate their score. We operate a freemium business model. That's a strategy that we agreed was the best for us in terms of being able to get to high number of users very, very quickly. And so the price per user to service the user on a yearly basis had to be very, very low. And again, because of the fact that we're a website, having it highly available, it's a key for us. So at minimum, we needed to have 99.9% availability. So why the Azure platform? You know, right out of the box, the thing that you get with Azure is that it's highly redundant. It's highly available, right? As I mentioned, I'm an IT guy, so in my prior roles, I managed data centers, you know, and it's quite an ordeal to having to deal with, not only from a hardware perspective in terms of having servers, but also, you know, being able to manage, you know, network components, you know, 3 DNS boxes, load balancers, et cetera, right? Azure gives you all that right out of the box. And it's very, very cost effective, especially when you put it in conjunction with the BizSpark program, which we're already on. And again, as a startup, the thing that's key for us is that it's pay-per-use model. You know, our traffic on average may not be high, but when we do get some press coverage, you know, we're going to get a lot of eyeballs on the site, so we need to be able to ramp up to handle those spikes in traffic. Also, a very important decision point for us was having, you know, we were already familiar with, we were already familiar and had in-house expertise with the Microsoft stack, and obviously that was a very, very key point. And then, you know, from, you know, having served as a CTO, as a manager of data centers and whatnot, it was very important to, you know, have one person or one vendor or partner to go to when, you know, shit hits the fan, right? When everything blows up, you know, you don't want your 2 vendors or 2 partners to pointing fingers at one another. You want to go to one source and say, you know what, here's what the issue is, need your help, you know, you need to fix it. And so having one partner vendor to go to was also very key for us. And then lastly, and this point I can't emphasize enough, is, you know, Azure has allowed, or, you know, obviously we didn't know this at the time, but, you know, it really very much allows us to focus on our core business. You know, we weren't in the business of, you know, building and maintaining data centers. We're in the business of solving a problem for our users and doing that well. That's our core competency, not managing data centers. And, you know, we wanted to choose a platform that was going to allow us to do that. In terms of architecture, you know, we use, let me pull up my notes here. Let's spend a few minutes to review our architecture and see what gets called during a build process. As I mentioned, we covered the build process earlier in terms of, you know, how it gets initiated, what happens, right? And I'm going to cover in terms of from the back-end perspective, when a user signs up for the service, what happens on the back end? So obviously our UI resides on a web role, and that's ASP.NET Web App. Our worker roles, we have 3 different worker roles. We have what's called a build prep worker role, a footprint build worker role, as well as a scheduled job worker role. And without getting into the finer details, a build prep worker role is essentially taking a request from the UI and it takes that and it's preparing the request to the different queues that we have, the career footprint queue, the personal footprint queue, as well as the social footprint queue. So it takes the request from the UI and says, all right, I need to go and run this footprint build process and refresh the score for this end user. And, you know, I'm going to hand this off to the footprint build worker roles. In terms of the scheduled job worker roles, its job is mainly to, you know, run our cron jobs on a monthly basis. So in terms of run the refreshes as well as do some cleanup of the session tables and so forth. So I'm going to walk through what happens when a user signs up for the service. When a build is initiated by a new user during registration, or when a user clicks refresh your score off of the score guidance page, a new build request gets created and validated. By validation, I mean we check to see if the user has a valid subscription status. We check to see if the user has any update tokens available, right? So by default, in our free version, we offer 3 refreshes. So we do a quick check to see if they have any tokens available. And then also, we check to see if there's if there's a footprint build request already running. If it passes that validation test, the request gets initiated, it gets enqueued on this build request queue here. And then the UI begins polling the build request queue for an update. And it does that by checking the state table in SQL Azure. Build prep worker role, which is polling the build request queue, dequeues the message and begins its work. It retrieves users' OAuth authorization tokens from SQL Azure and then pulls the latest information from LinkedIn, Facebook, and other data sources. If the tokens are expired, then it stops, and that informs the UI that the user's tokens are expired. However, if it's successful, then it's going to take the data retrieved from users' LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, etc., and it's going to store it in Azure Blob Storage. Once the build prep worker role saves build request and source data required by footprints to blob storage, it's going to enqueue its request on these three queues here: career footprint, personal footprint, and social footprint. Footprint build worker role, which is here, is constantly polling these queues in a round-robin fashion. And I have a slide here in a couple of minutes that we'll get to, which discusses why we chose round-robin versus parallel. But this footprint build worker role is polling these queues and is looking for work, right? So if it finds a build request on those, then it's going to dequeue that request, and it's going to start processing its request, or it's going to start running the footprint build process for that user. In the footprints, the source data is used as drivers into other data sources, as well as, again, search engines. And some of the resulting data that we retrieve gets fed into the entity extraction engine that I mentioned earlier, which is handled by this scheduled job work role as well. Once the footprint build worker role finishes, or once the career footprint queue and all the other queues finishes the task at hand, then they go on to score the users. They score individually, and then also start producing metrics for the end user. When all three footprints are done, the build state table is updated, UI stops polling, and we display the end result to the user. So why do we choose 4 work? How do we determine what roles made sense for us? I think this is still true, but at least when we started, Azure only allowed 5 roles or 5 endpoints per hosted service. For us, again, we're using 4 roles there. 1 web role, which is for UI, and that's ASP.NET Web App. 1 worker role for build preparation, which handles ingesting users' LinkedIn account data, databasing any new data found in profiles. And then the worker role, the footprint build worker role, uses data from build preparation to seed searches, consume third-party APIs, correlate data, entity extraction, scoring, and metrics. So majority of our work actually gets done here in the footprint build roles. And in terms of from a scaling perspective, we typically have 3 footprint build roles as compared to 1 build worker role. And then finally, the scheduled jobs worker role is used for background service that does supporting work, such as session cleanup, monthly refreshes, and so on. Some of the points I'd like to highlight here is that, looking at metrics from a role instance standpoint, right? So CPU utilization, memory consumption, and so forth, is good for understanding how well that instance is behaving, right? Or how well that instance is performing with respect to the code that it's delivering. And and you can improve that to make it more efficient and so forth. However, from our standpoint, what's more important is, from an end user perspective, does the end user, how does the end user perceive the performance of the application that we're delivering to them? And so the reason we've segmented the roles such as we have is so that the user knows immediately how fast or how slow the application is. Again, from our standpoint, it's a better way to understand the performance and monitor of the application. And to do so, we watch the loads on the queues as opposed to individual instances. So we don't look at CPU or memory utilization at the instance level. We focus more on how well the queues are performing. So when I run, when we process, say, 500 build requests in a given day, how do we do it in terms of how long did it take to finish the career footprint build? How long did it take to finish the social footprint build? And so on. If you're able to break your business logic into discrete chunks and isolate them on separate roles, then we can spin up instances as needed, right? So as I mentioned, if we know that the performance on these build roles is suffering, then we can easily monitor the queues and then increase instance count for those individual instances. In terms of storage, when we initially started out, in terms of storage, Azure offers 3 different storage types, right? So you have SQL, you have SQL Azure, you have table, and you have blob storage. When we initially started using SQL Azure, everything was in SQL Azure. We didn't utilize any of the blob storage or any of the table storage components. However, and the primary reasons for that was obviously we had expertise with relational databases. It was the smallest learning curve for us. And in terms of from a tool set perspective, the SQL Azure had a mature tool set. Again, this was back in May, June of last year compared to now. I think it's come a long way from a tool set offering blob and table storage. As our requirements grew, we started moving more and more stuff towards blob storage. And one of the reasons that we do that was the primary reason that we did that was actually from a scalability perspective. And then also, obviously, SQL Azure has a ceiling cap in terms of how big your database can grow. For every user that we sign up, we consume approximately, I want to say, close to 1 meg of database space. So we didn't want to continue to put that space, utilize that storage in SQL Azure. We wanted to use blob storage for that. And I think we'll continue moving in this direction. Obviously, we're not going to move away from SQL Azure. I think SQL Azure will continue to play a role for us, but it's going to be more in terms of handling transactional data. So in terms of calculating statistics as well as metrics for our users. Again, during in terms of the architecture, I mentioned that the footprint build workload was polling these 3 footprint queues, and it was doing it in a round-robin fashion, right? So, if the footprint build worker role had availability, it would say, all right, I've got this list of here's my queue I need to have processed. So we weren't sending them all to career or personal footprint builder or social footprint builder, right? It was done in a round-robin fashion instead of in a parallel fashion. And the reason for that was predominantly because we weren't multi-threaded when we started out. And again, we just weren't multi-threaded, and that was because of a lack of or constraint by the number of developers we had on staff. We've attempted to move in that direction, and we think we will fully become multi-threaded probably by the end of the year, but we're not there today. However, there are some fringe benefits in terms of the round-robin queuing that we're doing, which is it is much easier to debug an issue, right? So if I know that it was a footprint, which part failed during the build process? Did it fail on a career footprint side, or did it fail on the social footprint build side? We know exactly where to look whereas if one instance was handling all of them, it would take longer to troubleshoot. And again, we were able to achieve or meet our business objective in terms of, we had a good handle on how well the performance was by monitoring the queues on the back end and then throttling instances as needed. Some of the considerations, future considerations for us is, today we use small instances or single core instances for everything, for our web roles to our worker roles. We just haven't had time to analyze whether it makes sense to do some benchmark testing to see if it makes sense for us to use larger roles or dual core or with higher memory boxes, right? Higher memory machines, and see how the performance is. That's something that we're going to reanalyze and take a look at in the coming months. We're also going to continue to transition from SQL Azure to blob and table storage, but as I mentioned earlier, we're going to continue using SQL Azure as well. And then, we're looking at re-architecting the backend to implement CQRS pattern, which is command query responsibility segregation, right? And the hope that the reason we're doing that is because we think it'll help us scale better by splitting the data model into two so that it's optimized. One for data retrieval and manipulation, and the second for presentation to the end user. And then, one of the things that we haven't done today is being able to have the capability within the code base to auto-throttle instances as needed, right? So one of the things that we want to look at is, if the performance is at a certain level, go ahead and automatically throttle the number of instances that we have on a web role or on a worker role as needed. Set some business objectives in terms of what level of performance is acceptable, and then auto-throttle instances as needed. Lastly, one thing that I think that I heard earlier this morning that of the Azure CDN, right? That's something so Azure Content Delivery Network. That's something that we're keenly interested in because our user population is across the globe, and we want to utilize that to deliver content faster to the end users. So, and the fourth and the final segment is I wanted to share some stats from our Mashable.com coverage, which was it was an article titled "Do You Need a Credit Report for Your Online Life?" It ran on March 3rd, and here's some stats from it. We had approximately 5,000 unique new visitors to this site, and we converted, out of those 5,000, we converted 1,800 to new users. So these users, clicked on LinkedIn or Facebook sign up and became users of our service. And we had approximately 40,000 page views. Out of those 1,800 new users, 840 of them connected only one data source. So that's user coming in, signing in with LinkedIn, and just looking at the services and not adding any additional data source. However, 22% of them, so 405 of them, added either Facebook or Twitter. So if I come in via LinkedIn, then I go on to add Twitter, well, that's two data sources. So we had 405 users that went on to add a secondary data source. And then we had another 555 that went on to add another data source. So they had a total of 3 data sources. And the reason I'm highlighting these is because every time a user adds a data source, we run a full refresh for that user. And that means there's an additional burden on the number of instances that we have and so forth. And also, as I mentioned, as I showed in my demo, the actionable guidance that we provide to the end user, we encourage them to take some action and then come back and refresh their score. And we saw about 23% of our users doing that on that day. So in total, we had 4,015 footprint and score refreshes that we conducted over a 20-hour period. That averages out to about 200 refreshes per hour. On average, it took about 18 seconds for us to refresh, do a full data discovery analysis on their online brand, and then generating this career score for that user, including evaluating all their LinkedIn connections, all their Facebook connections, all the companies that are affiliated with, et cetera. The peak time, on average, that was about one refresh every 18 seconds that we ran. The peak for us was around noon to 1 p.m., where we saw a refresh occur every 5 seconds. In terms of average processor time per refresh, it was approximately 38 seconds. However, actual waiting time for the end user was approximately 21 seconds, and it was actually quite lower than that. And what the difference there is, because we have the roles segmented as we do, we're able to, when I sign up for the service, my career footprint can go ahead and build, and at the same time, my social footprint can build. I don't have to wait until one is complete. And so the actual wait time for the user is quite low compared to what the processor, average processor time is. And again, as I was saying, that 21 seconds is quite high because we had some users that had over 5,000 connections on LinkedIn, and that definitely skewed those numbers upwards. In terms of some averages, on average, we ran 15 queries per user per refresh. We queried 7 APIs. Average size of the document was 850 kilobytes. In terms of average number of connections that we saw on LinkedIn and Facebook was 141 and 288. And then average number of companies and Facebook companies was 942 and 240. So quite a large network analysis we had to produce for the end user. So what do we do to handle that? How do we handle that traffic load pretty instantly? What we did was to handle the extra load. Obviously, we received a call from the reporter that was going to write the story, saying that she's going to put this release out later that day. So we went ahead and bumped up the number of instances that we were running. We increased the web roles to 8, builder prep roles to 8, and then footprint builder roles to 24. And we did that in approximately 20 to 25 minutes. And we ran at that at a higher instance count. So we scaled to meet the need for approximately 24 hours or 20 hours or so. And it cost us $96 to do that. For $96, we registered 1,800 new users. And I think you'd be pretty pressed to beat those numbers. So, and $100, register 1,800 new users, and provide a top-notch experience for our end users, which is something every startup's dream is. Questions? I know I apologize. We only have a couple of minutes, but I can be reached at nip@mywebcareer.com, or you can look me up on Twitter, Nip Zalavadia, on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/n/Nip Zalavadia. I would ask for you to please fill out the evaluation forms. I'll hang out afterwards. I don't know if this room is being utilized for another conference, but I'll be out in the hallway or just about if you guys want to come and chat with me personally afterwards as well.